Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mike McMahon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And it's my pleasure today to be talking with John Bell, who is a fellow of the Hymn Society and is certainly well known to us as a composer and a hymn writer and a animateur and song leader. And it's just great to have you with us, John, and welcome. I just want to say to all of you who are with us that it looks like we have a pretty nice crowd today, that if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, put your comments in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring those as we go through the session today, and happy to raise as many of those as possible during our time together. So, well, John, it's great to be with you today, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about yourself and your background and how you're growing up and how you got interested in music and ministry and um, um, singing.
Well, I suppose I had the advantage of growing up in a household where people sang. I mean, that was just my mother and father. They just did that all the time. And so my brothers and I grew up in a place where singing was just a thing which you did. And you didn't have to wait until a party. You know, my mother would wash the dishes and she'd sing at the same time. So singing was never an issue or an unknown. And I mean, I never wanted to be a singer. One of my young brothers, I've got two young brothers, and one of them ended up singing in the Royal Opera House all his career. But for me, when I'd grown up within the church, and when I was 14, I'd coming up for 15, I saw this advertisement for a church organist. Now, I had never played the organ, but this didn't look as if it was going to be a great endeavor because it was a one-manualed organ with 5 stops, a swell pedal, and a thing called the pedal effect, which meant that there was a stopped pipe for the bottom 2 octaves that sounded like someone's stomach rumbling when you put it on. And I auditioned for this and got the job. It was a country church. It was a lovely congregation, 2 services on a Sunday, morning and evening, plus a Sunday school after the first service, and a choir of 16 adults and a junior choir of 20 children. And the princely sum in American money of $70 a year. Oh. So it was paid in monthly installments of about $6. Wow. And I loved it. And it took me into church music. I mean, I liked the sound of the organ, and I liked, to get people to sing. So for 2 years, I worked in that small church, and with great acceptance and encouragement from people. And then kind of graduated to a larger organ, a 2-manualed. It was an electronic reed organ or electric reed organ. It sounded even worse than the single manual pipe. And eventually they kind of got rid of that and they put in an electronic instrument. So I had 4 years between 2 churches, and then I went to university. And by that time, I'd struggled, I suppose, much my teenage years as to whether I should become a music teacher, which what I wanted to do. My heart wasn't that. A school music teacher. I never wanted to be a performer, but I wanted to go teach music in school. And the other thing was that I had also, from a very early age, felt called to the ministry. And nobody in the family had ever done that at all. It wasn't that kind of family. So eventually there was a kind of crisis of vocation, and around the time when I was 18, I decided that ministry was where I should go, but I had to do in Scotland 2 degrees. And the first was an arts degree, and I took English and music, and that put me off music almost for life. I mean, it was taught by professors, some of whom I think really felt they should be called to Oxford or Cambridge, and the telephone hadn't rung. And it was there was no practical work at all, no writing, no. I mean, we had to, reharmonize chorales, which Bach had done very well, but we had to reharmonize them. It was an odd way to teach music. compared to now. So I left after a year, had took a year out, come back and did theology, and had fully expected that I would enter a parish, and go and, do stuff in a small parish. I'd already had 2 years working as an associate in Amsterdam. And it happened that somebody said to me when I was looking for work, there's a job going in youth work and we think you should apply for that. So I applied for this job. It was for the area of Glasgow, for the Presbyterian churches, and the other people were in for it, but they appointed me. And the way I got into church music, apart from the organ spell, was that in the second year, there was a big international festival on the island of Iona, which I'd never been to before. People came from all over the world, young people between ages of 16 and say 25. There were girls there from Ghana. There were people from Germany, a whole lot. And the person playing the piano, because in Iona Abbey, they've never had an organ, but they had a piano. The person who played the piano played excessively slowly for the last 2 bars of every hymn. And it was just appalling. Da 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 da. This guy was a music lecturer. And it was awful. And we've got these people from all over the world, and they don't know what's happening. They're singing at speed, and there's a couple of pianos about 5 bars behind. And I never done this since. I prayed to God that something might happen, because we had 250 kids who were there for a great event, and this piano playing was going to kill it. And the next morning at breakfast, somebody come to me and said, "Can you play a piano?" I said, "Well, not very well, but I can play a piano. Would you take over the music? Because the man who was playing has left the island with severe dysentery." and that's how I get into church music.
So your prayer was answered by dysentery.
It's nice that you put it that way, Mike.
That's really fascinating. That's interesting. So that was your first brush with the island of Iona.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, I know that, of course, you've been associated with the community of Iona. You're part of the community there. How did that transpire?
It was also through youth work. It was it was a place where 2 things could happen. One thing, I could get kids to go there irrespective of their religious affiliation. It's totally ecumenical, but also always had a great history of encouraging kids from impoverished backgrounds to come there for a week. And some people, some kids found their vocation there, some found their life partner, some found their faith there. And the other thing was that because of this, my start there, I realized that apart from this appalling piano playing, all we were asking young people to sing was from a 1970 church hymn book, which no one in the Presbyterian church really favoured. And there was nothing in it that spoke of the 20th century at all. And at this event, I mean, there were girls from Ghana and from Zimbabwe, and they're dancing, they're singing a different kind of music entirely. And somehow I thought, well, this island, and the Iona community, which had a slight history of engagement with the music from Malawi through a man called Tom Colvin, whose song "Kneels at the Feet of His Friend" will be fairly well known. It is all over the English-speaking world. So that just made me feel I should do something in this job which will enable young people to sing. That was the main thing, because they weren't singing in our churches, they weren't singing at youth events I went to, and in Iona where they would sing, they were stuck with this 1970 Presbyterian hymn book. And so part of my work from the second year on was holding big events in Glasgow once a month. We could have up to maybe between 400 and 500 kids. And we would have a lot of workshops, and we'd always close with a liturgy, which would never have a sermon in it at all. There was plenty of engagement. We did things that Presbyterians in Scotland had never done since the Reformation, like light candles, or sing in darkness, or sing without music. And in that forum, I both began to incorporate some music from other parts of the world, because one of the 2 people who shared my job with me was a Black South African, and he made us aware of the Song of the Black Church. And the other thing is that with the guy who was my long-term colleague, Graham Maul, he also grew from up in a church, in a house rather, where people sang folk tunes, his parents did. So we began to write texts which were in a contemporary language, and we allied them to Scottish folk tunes, because it didn't matter whether you were a punk rocker or whether you were, somebody from a different planet. Most people can sing folk tunes because they're not allied to a particular musical era or culture. They transcend that. And that's how our writing began.
Wow, that is so interesting. I mean, there's so many things in what you just said that we're all familiar with in your work that I wonder if I could just kind of ask you about a few of them. One of them has to do with language. I mean, I think that a lot of us who've sung your texts have felt like, wow, this is so fresh and sometimes even a little shocking, the kind of language that we have not been accustomed to hearing in hymns. Can you talk a little bit about that and your way you use language?
Well, it's really unconscious. I mean, I never had any desire to write hymns, I mean, at all. I mean, this just grew out of the necessity of giving kids something else to sing. And the first songs that we sung were mostly about Jesus, because I felt convinced that from the singing of the church, this is something which I researched a bit later, but from the singing of the church, if you were to say what you understood about Jesus from what you sang, it's very little, and much of it is quite erroneous, particularly about Christmas. The whole thing about being born in silence. Babies don't get born in silence. His mother wearing a blue dress, an innkeeper there. All of that stuff's not in the Bible. And maybe because of culturally, I've from Scotland had a kind of unconscious sense of the incarnation, that the word becoming flesh means that God invades or participates in human language, and it's the language of the people. It's not the language of the synagogue or the temple. Jesus' stories are not religious stories. They're stories about real life. So that made us, want to both express the calling of Jesus on our lives, the stories Jesus told, which we should be singing as well as telling each other, and also the incidents in Jesus' life, to put them in a different language context, and avoid the cliched stuff. And because we were writing not for a church, we weren't writing for a church, we were writing for a group of up to 400 and odd kids who were odd. They didn't all come from a blessed background. They didn't all come with a high faith component. So the texts had to invite people, maybe out of curiosity, or maybe out of no, there was never any deliberate shock. But when you use language which is not hymn language, then people who are used to, and particularly at that time, we were still singing these and thous, people who are used to a much more formal kind of address to God or about the things of the faith find it a bit discomforting. But these kids were the ones who convinced us that this was something we should continue.
Wow, that's very fascinating. I mean, your texts often put us in touch with the Jesus of the in-between, meaning not the birth and not the death, but all that happened between.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, and I did a lecture years ago for St. Martin's in the Field Church in the middle of London. They wanted me to do a lecture on Jesus in the Song of the Church. So I took the main British hymn books of the 20th century, hymns ancient and modern, the Methodist hymnal, the Baptist hymnal, the church hymnals that came from the Presbyterian tradition, and the Catholic hymnals, and looked at them. And you discovered that at the end of the 19th century into the 20th, most of these hymnals had nothing about the life of Jesus, apart from songs about the birth and songs about the death. They had nothing in between. And eventually, sometime, around about 1950, we get, sing a song of Bethlehem, which seemed pretty good, but then it was Nazareth And then he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then it was a cross. And you have these 33 years of life, 3 of which were public ministry, which have been omitted. Now, I think the reason, I mean, if this is my conjecture, the reason for the omission is either because people were so concerned with theology, particularly the theology of the cross, that that's the thing that had to be exhibited in the songs. But the other thing is that when you deal with the life of Jesus, you deal with hemorrhaging women. Now, I deal with Ethiopian eunuchs. Now, it's okay for Scottish people, because we can say eunuch has got the same ending as loch. It rhymes. But what's the rhyme for hemorrhaging? What's the rhyme for eunuch? When his parables are about virgins, well, that's a bit of an embarrassment for him. But if you're going to be honest to the text, if you're going to take the gospel seriously and try to articulate that, then all these kind of rather kind of, odd events, things that happen. Or Jesus being angry, for example. We would have any hymns about Jesus being angry. You go through the Gospels and you find there's at least 12 places where Jesus is angry. But we've got this, mild and meek and gentle seem to be the 3 adjectives most commonly used in traditional hymnody with regard to Jesus, of which none of them actually are mentioned in the Gospels. I mean, gentle is there, but meek. I mean, today, if you say, oh, that person's really quite meek, you mean that they're ineffectual. Whatever it meant in the Victorian era or in the Elizabethan era, it doesn't mean something very positive now.
Right. It's kind of interesting that a lot of the churches of the Reformation, by and large, are very focused on Scripture, and yet the hymnody has not been well informed by Scripture in many instances, huh?
No, and and particularly, me as a kind of genuine born Calvinist, grown up in the Presbyterian Church, we didn't sing hymns officially until about 1890. We only sang psalms because Jesus had sung the psalms, and then from about 1780, paraphrases of Scripture. But we didn't celebrate Christmas until round about 1920, right. And up until 1956, Christmas in Scotland was not a public holiday. So there was no reason for us to have Christmas. Maybe that was a blessing. I mean, we found them because, I think the old Presbyterians, they heard Methodists singing and thought, that's a damn sight better than what we have. And then the Catholics had good tunes at certain times of the year. We might have some of them. And eventually, beginning of the 20th century, organs, hymns, and choirs became evident within Protestant churches.
Yeah. I think that most of us have experienced your work as helping us to hear the gospel and to respond to it in ways that we hadn't really thought of before. The way you frame the language and the way you express these stories and put us in touch with them. I'm trying to find my question here, but it's just so striking to me that they're so fresh, and to those of us who are not Scottish, especially, yeah. I think there's a Scottish element to the way you express yourself too.
Well, I've got an accent, but so have you, Mike. Yes, I think that might be true. I think. Also, some of our earlier songs came out of writing for the services within Iona Abbey. Every evening, there's a evening liturgy, but it has a different focus. Sunday night is a quiet service; it's silent. Monday night is a service of peace and justice. Tuesday is a service of prayers for healing. Wednesday is a service which reflects our concern for the environment. Thursday, a service of commitment, and there's another time that we might have a Eucharist, an evening Eucharist. So particularly with the services of commitment, and all of the commitment, healing, and peace and justice, there was very little in our hymn books that dealt with these kind of things at all. And I think both Graham and I felt that if we wrote, we should do two things. The one is write out of human experience, but also write in a way which perhaps invited people into the conversation. Whether that, and particularly the services of commitment, you want to have a song which invites people to come to Jesus without using archaic language or language which some people would find a bit, fey or antiquated. So these contexts were, I think, what like I remember when we wrote a song for one of the services of healing, and it was based. We only had two songs at that time in the hymn book about prayers for healing. It wasn't a thing that Presbyterians did, and the Iona Community was a bit unusual in that respect. But we'd been with people for over the weekend and discovered that there was a couple there who had lost a baby. There was a woman there who had been abused, and we realised that if these are the people of God and this is their experience, we have to register that if we're going to allow people to feel that they can inhabit the words of a text. And at first, that was seen as, it's a bit near the bone. Well, Jesus got quite near the bone, and the song of the church sometimes has to follow suit.
Yeah, a lot of your work is near the bone. I was thinking of the collection that you produced after the shooting of children in Scotland, and some of those texts, very.
That was the songs for grieving called "The Last Journey."
Right.
Yeah, "The Last Journey."
Yeah. Can you just talk about that collection a little bit and how that came to be? I mean, to produce an entire collection from that one event.
Yeah. Well, it was partly the suggestion of GIA, who are our publishers. I had done a choral collection before that, and then they said, "Would you consider doing a collection of songs for grieving?" We'd already, I think, a book called "When Grief is Raw," and they said, "We'd like you to, do a choral collection which we called "The Last Journey." And all of these songs were based on particular people or experience. One or two of them are psalms, and I've always had a passion for the psalms, and a passion. Every generation has to re-articulate the psalms. It has to incarnate the sentiment of the psalms within their own vocabulary. But there were. One of them, for example, was a woman whose funeral I took in Amsterdam, who was a stunning woman. But when I worked there in the 70s, I'd known little about her. She was an office cleaner, and she spoke English. She occasionally would go on holiday to the east of England. Not more than that, I didn't know. And then years later, I was back covering for the pastor during the summer for a month, and she had died, and I was asked to take her funeral. And I discovered from talking to her niece that this woman, during the war, when Amsterdam was occupied by the German forces, had discovered at her door one night a Jewish woman who said, "They're rounding up my people, and my husband's in Spain, my daughter's in Austria. Can you help me?" And this office cleaner took the woman into her house, had a cup of tea with her, and then said, "If you want, you can stay with me. And I'll give you clothes to wear because you're dressed like a Jewish woman. I'll ask you to come to my church. You don't, not because I want you to become a Christian, but it'll take pressure off you." And at the end of the war, this woman was alive. Her daughter and her husband had been killed. And she was alive because of an office cleaner who took Jesus seriously when he said, "You should love your neighbor and the one who is called your enemy." If the Nazis had discovered that she was harboring a Jewish woman in her house, she would have been on the road to Belsen or Auschwitz along with it. Now, I remember thinking, this woman is worth more than "Abide with Me" or "Blessed Assurance" or, another of these kind of regular hymns that we sing at funerals. So all these texts were provoked by not my experience, but the experience of people whose grief and whose distress I'd felt should be articulated, because other people will feel this way, and other people need to say goodbye in a way other than just Amazing Grace.
Wow. It's just striking to me how these songs have come out of particular situations and yet have such universal resonance. We sing these songs and we all can identify with them. We know people that we can relate to the songs that you have given us. It's very.
Well, I suppose that's the thing that makes the Psalms universal. Now, neither Graham or I ever had any desire or intention to, have stuff published or any of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we did really feel that anything had to be rooted in reality. And then you discover that the way in which the Psalms, curiously, in different ages, begin to speak about different things to different people, comes from them having been written not for a competition, but for a specific situation.
Right.
That for example, there are a whole lot of psalms now which are being sung, which have to do with how nature celebrates God. And in this era, when we're trying to, particularly helped by Pope Francis, try to work out an understanding of how human beings relate to nature, the Psalms have been saying that nature speaks in voices to itself which we cannot understand, and nature offers praise to God, which has been going on before the human voice was ever heard on earth. And suddenly, that which was discovered because somebody just rejoiced one morning at the world being so beautiful, he writes it down, or she writes it down, and then generations later, suddenly this comes into focus again, and we can use these ancient texts in a new context and feel that they are authentic in a way for us, which may be very different from the initial rendition of the text.
You mentioned Graham, and I think there may be a lot of people here who maybe don't know who Graham is. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your collaboration with Graham Maul.
Oh, yeah. Well, it would take all night to try and describe him. I never knew this guy, but I was looking when I started my work, when I became ordained, for some people who might kind of help me to negotiate my way through the Church of Scotland in Glasgow. And I called a meeting, sent notes to all the churches, of which there were 180, saying, I'm the new person in charge of youth work, and I'd like you to come to a meeting, send somebody. Well, 5 people turned up. One of whom came to the wrong meeting. 2 of whom were adults who were both over 60, and there were 2 guys, and Graham was one of them. And at the end of the meeting, I said to these 2 guys, look, can you help me to clear up the chairs? Because I put out about 90 chairs, so they did that. And then I said, would you like to go for a drink? And I said, if you take a glass of beer, so they said yes. And we couldn't get into any pub because every pub we went to thought that Graham was 15. At that time, he was 20. But I had this profound conviction that this person might be important to me for the rest of my life. Now, I've felt that about nobody else. And he and his pal had my address. So after a while, he wrote to me and said, I would quite like to get involved in youth work, apart from in my church. So I knew there was a scheme which had been set up in a very deprived part of the city, and I put in touch with that. And we got to know each other and recognized that his brain was very different from me, totally wired differently. He was training to be an architect, and I had done theology. And he was within a year within months actually, of doing his professional exams. He had already had a degree in architecture, but there was 3-year apprenticeship. And he was within a couple of months of going for his professional exams. And he, to his chagrin of his parents, he said, I want to give this up. I want to do youth work, which was, beyond their comprehension. And so he spoke to me about it, and I said, well, I've got this job, and if you'd like to share it, then we can do it together. So he and another guy who was South African, we shared the one job and the one salary. And then when we moved to the Iona community, it was he and I who were in charge of youth work there. So he grew up with this love of folk music. And he also knew every Beatles song off by heart. I mean, a whole lot of weird groups. He was very interested in them. He didn't read music at all, but he had a passion for it and a passion for getting people to sing. And this was, I mean, I just, I couldn't have had a better colleague. In fact, the first book we published had 50 songs in it, and every one of them was handwritten by Graham Maul. He couldn't read music, but his architectural skills enabled him. This is before, computers which could print music. This is long before then, 1984. Everyone was handwritten. And when eventually it was published in America by GIA, they asked which process we were using, which scheme we were using. And I said, well, there isn't a scheme. It's a guy called Graham Maul. He just did them all by hand. So for almost 40 years, we worked together, and it was a great friendship, a great relationship. And very sadly, 6 years ago, with little notice, he and certainly his family and his girlfriend had no idea about this. He died of cancer, and it was a big loss.
Yeah, that was a big loss. Now, you're both involved in the Iona community, and I think probably the work that you did together has made Iona known around the world. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Iona community and your experience as being part of it.
Well, it's an ecumenical community. It started in 1938. I don't go into the whole history of it.
Yeah.
But it's at its root, its aim was to do two things. There was a physical thing, to rebuild an abbey in Iona where St. Columba landed in 563. And the abbey had been constructed in a fairly secure form by the Benedictines in the 11th century. It had been destroyed at the Reformation, as many churches in Scotland were, by Protestants. And this man, who was a Presbyterian minister, and also he came from a noble family, he felt a call from God to rebuild the abbey. So 1938, he got tradesmen and apprentice clergy to go up and to put the stones back on each other. And by 1963, the building looked as it would have done round about 1540. And that having been done, or during when it was done, he realized that there was a big gulf between the life of the church and the language of the church and the experience of many people who didn't darken its doors, and felt that, and particularly on issues to do with peace and justice, that the church had to be awakened to how God's kingdom was about more than candles and incense and the proper preface and garments and all the rest of it. And so the community was set up to encourage people, if they felt called to it, to become members on an annual basis. We don't have a life membership, but we have to commit ourselves to marrying prayer and politics, to be engaged in the processes of justice, and particularly now to have a primary concern for the ecological state of the world. And to do that, not just as a personal discipline, which it is, but also to try in the relationships we have and in the congregations which we belong to. We've got Catholic members as well as Baptist and Anglican and Episcopalian, to enable these emphases, which for us are important, to be shared in our churches. So yeah, that's where it's at. And in the first days, it was only men, and it was only men within Great Britain. And then gradually women became members, and as transport changed, you can get from Amsterdam to Glasgow quicker than London to Glasgow. So we opened membership to people living elsewhere. Yeah, that's virtually it.
Well, last month we had Sally Ann Morris here to talk,
Oh,
and she was talking about her experience leading music at Iona, and she was just enthralled with the spirit of Iona, and
well, we wish that we could import her. Because she was such a great presence, and we have difficulty getting a musician. It's an island. It takes you a day to get there, and there's no kind of ice rink or cinema, or in during the winter the cafe's closed, so there's sometimes a bar which might be open in one of the two hotels. So it's not an enticement. But particularly for young people who are graduating from a music college, to have access to liturgy twice a day, and every day you have to teach songs, and every day you have the possibility of getting people to make music with you. So everybody who's gone there has enjoyed it, but I can understand how from a distance it might seem a bit of a kind of daunting prospect. But from Easter to September, October, that's when most people come. And for anybody who wants a good job, it's a good job.
Well, we put it out there to this group who's watching right now. Good. I first heard about Iona from Horace Allen, who I was friends with back in the 70s and 80s, and he was it was just enthralled. I mean, I was just so enthralled myself.
His big disappointment was that there was no organ. And he tried to persuade the community back in the 60s and 70s that should an organ, but it'd be pointless. It's cold, and the abbey is not heated in the winter. They go into a small chapel. It's never ever had an organ in its life, and even the piano now, we have a very good electronic piano. Previously, 2 grand pianos, but even they go out of tune.
Of course. I wonder if you could talk a little bit also about song leading. I mean, I've gone to events where you've been the leader, and I've just always been so impressed with the way that you can take a crowd of people and form them into a singing community. So what appears to me to be so easily. Do you have any thoughts about song leading and what makes a good song leader?
Well, I do it, or at least I did it in the beginning out of necessity. When we were doing this youth work, I wanted kids to sing, and most of them didn't read music. We don't have good teaching of music in schools. So what do? The classic thing was, well, you play it in the organ, and then you hope that people will have learned the tune having heard it once. But I mean, what's the point? You play it in the organ, and there's 4 notes from the fingers, and there's 1 from the pedals. You just don't learn. And church musicians, by and large, they're taught about choral tone and Bach's counterpoint, but they're not told about how to teach a congregation. And certainly I, in my musical education, had never been taught. I could only get a choir to sing if the choir had the notes. Well, Macaulay did sing. And when we started a group in Glasgow, which went for about 16 years, we always had between 15 and 22 people, and they met every Monday night in a small room, and they sang in 4-part harmony. Only 3 out of 20 could read music, but I taught them line by line. I taught them using my hands. So with a congregation, I mean, I knew that it worked. I knew that if people, never mind the words. I think the words are secondary in process of teaching. If people watching your hand going up or down know where their voice should go as you sing to La, I mean, I do it all the time. I'll say, I'm going to sing this to La, and my hand will go up and down with my voice. Then I'll say, now would you sing with me to La? And go up and down. And once they've got the tune, then they can sing the words. But the way that church typically functions is, we will put the words in front of you and you will learn the tune. No, that's not it. You learn a tune and you remember it. You never remember 5 verses of text, but you remember a 16-bar tune if you learn the tune before you see the words. And so, I began to do this, and then all the group that I had, all of them could teach songs. It means occasionally we'd go to a big festival in England called Greenbelt, and sometimes it used to be in a race course, so we might have had 2,000 people sitting in the seats in a race course, and 4 of us teaching the bass, tenor, alto, and soprano line to different sectors of that group, and then they'd all sing in a 4-part harmony. And it's but for me the essential thing is that you have to believe in your own voice, which took me a while, and you have to believe that other people can do it. And if you hide behind music or hide behind instructions about how can we have a bit more rallentando here, it just doesn't work. And also all of us from childhood can remember tunes and text, songs that were taught us. No, they weren't taught us. We just learned from our parents. Whether it's row the boat gently down the stream. We learned these before we could read. And we learned them because our parents, and in my case, my grandparents, believed that you sang to a child and the child would repeat. Somehow, as we grow older, become more sophisticated and think, no, we won't be able to do it unless we see the notes and unless we have the words in front of us.
Right.
So.
Right. I mean, of course, you come from a tradition where lining out songs is sort of time-honored way. Right?
No. Oh, no. I wouldn't say time-honored. No. The lining out that happened in Scotland post-Reformation happened at a time when, now I say this without any xenophobia, but in Scotland, we learned to read more quickly than in England because John Knox, the great reformer, the Calvinist reformer, wanted a school and a church in every parish. Henry VIII just wanted another wife. So while we were building schools, Henry VIII was closing the monasteries. So England, at the time when the King James Bible came out and the early Psalms were being written, was a country which, more than Scotland, had people who were unable to read. So the lining out began not in Scotland. I mean, it's still carried here in the Gaelic community, but it came originally from England. And what happened was that a man would on a monotone sing a line of text. O thou my soul, bless God the Lord. And people would be told that goes to a particular tune. So they would sing, O thou my soul, bless God the Lord, back to the man at the front. And all that in me is, and all that in me is. So they knew the tune, and line by line, they were given the words on a monotone, which they would then replicate, but to the tune. So that's where that began. And you find, Jimmy Abington recognised that some of the black churches in America learned that from the time of slavery, when the slaves were in the gallery and the saved white people were downstairs, and if they were Presbyterian, then they lined out the Psalms. And the black church, when it began, copied that process. But it really began in England, and it really began because Henry VIII wanted another wife.
I guess on this side of the Atlantic, we got it from the Scottish, right? Scottish immigrants.
Oh yes, you did.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And certainly the Black Church, it's got it from the Scottish.
So I don't know whether to say sorry or whether to say, well, you're welcome to it.
Well, time is going so quickly. I want to talk just a little bit about the Hymn Society, and I know you've been involved in the Hymn Society to some degree. Of course, you're a fellow of the Hymn Society, and I wonder if you just say a little bit about your experience with the Hymn Society, what kinds of things you've been involved with.
Well, I haven't been there for a while, partly because I come to America when I've got work there, and as I now should be retired, I'm not over as much as I was. But I think it's a great organisation. I don't know another organisation where people are so immediately friendly. and where there's a glorious lack of competition. It's I mean, people might say, they've got a Tate and Brady book, or they've got, an early Julian, and you have one, but there's no real competition. And when I've gone there, and I've brought people from Scotland to come to Hymn Society as well, we've always been very warmly welcomed, particularly some years when we've brought a bottle of whiskey. It's been good to for me particularly to learn about church music through the Hymn Society, because I learned nothing about church music when I studied music in university. And the passion that people have for congregational singing, it's not something which I've found anywhere else actually in the world in terms of an agency or a society, apart from the Hymn Society. And I've learned from many people there whose work has been published and who I've met personally and talked to, and also on occasion when I've done workshops, which I'd never done before, where people who are budding hymn writers or just trying the craft, where in interacting with them, I began to develop an understanding of the process, because it had never been articulated to me before. So I owe a great deal of gratitude to all of you who are members of that society. Keep paying for it, keep going. It's a great, great affair.
Yeah, I think another aspect of the Hymn Society that sort of fits with the trajectory of your work is its ecumenical nature. I went into the database once and counted the people put their denominational affiliation, and I came up with more than 50 different ones, which is quite astounding to have an organization where there's that kind of interaction among people from different traditions. And that your work also has contributed to that, the ability of people to sing ecumenically. So anyway, just one last question, and that is, so for the Hymn Society, looking forward, what would be your fondest hope for us as an organization?
I would hope that you go for another 100 years.
From your lips to God's ears, right?
And yes, and I hope that the Hymn Society will be the place which will encourage other writing. And other writing doesn't need to happen when there's a competition.
Right.
Just to get people together and to talk about what makes things easy or what makes things difficult, or what's a hint that you might find handy. I think that's invaluable. And the way in which the Hymn Society can do this will ensure that for the next century, as long as you're going, we have good quality hymns written by people who do it out of conviction and out of love for God and God's people.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much. I think I can speak for everyone who's watching right now and to say how grateful we are for you and for the work that you've done and the contributions you've made and the way you've inspired us and helped us to broaden our perspective. You've just given us all a great gift, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm now going to have dinner because it's that kind of time in the United Kingdom.
You've earned it. Thank you, John. Thank you for being with us today. And thanks, everybody, for being with us. We'll hopefully see you again all next month. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.